Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Works Committee. We have, as usual, a general agenda and a consent agenda. The consent agenda items will be taken on one motion, except for anything that is pulled at the request of a council member. Are there any of the consent agenda items to be pulled for discussion?
Item C2, please.
C2. And I know that there has been a request from the citizen who essentially
C3.
brought item C3 to discuss, so we'll pull that.
C1, please.
C1, okay.
There's nothing further. I make a motion to approve the balance of the consent agenda.
All right. Any further discussion on items C4 and 5? If not, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? That's approved. We'll go now to item C1, please.
Item C1, information on encroachment standards for small cell wireless facilities in the rights-of-way of the City of Winston-Salem by adding Section 104 to Chapter 74, Article 3 of the City Code.
And reporting, yes, Ms. Jensen-Guthold.
Yes, yes. So,
Is your mic on?
excuse me. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes. So, we have some bodies of federal and state law which contain standards pertaining to the siting of small cell wireless facilities. And we have been approached by a couple of companies that would like to erect small cell wireless facilities in public rights-of-way. As a result of that, we've begun to craft a small cell wireless ordinance for the siting of facilities in public rights-of-way. And we're doing that in conjunction with 4 other cities, Charlotte, Durham, Raleigh, and Greensboro. And we're also doing it in conjunction with some industry representatives. So we're in the midst of crafting that ordinance. We have a meeting about it this coming Monday. At the same time, there's some legislation proposed called House Bill 310. And it's going to try to make some modifications to existing state statutes pertaining to the siting of these facilities. So that's in process as well. We've been in touch with the North Carolina League of Municipalities. We've submitted our comments to the proposed revisions, and these are revisions proposed by the industry. And they are meeting with the industry to negotiate some revisions to that legislation, and that's also in process. So while these things happen, we continue to work on the ordinance. We anticipate bringing you the ordinance in June, a first draft of it, with possible final approval in August.
All right. Thank you. Questions? Mr. Larson?
I know this is very much a moving target.
Yes.
And I don't think the public's very well informed as to what it means functionally, visually, financially. It sounds like what we have is private vendors that are going to start using public property, streets, for basically small cell towers. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and these things are going to be scattered around in neighborhoods or downtowns and wherever, and we don't know what they look like yet, and we don't know how they're going to function, and more importantly, we don't know how much money the city's going to make off of this.
Yes, council member. So the purpose of the ordinance will be to invite responsible actors in to provide a fair and consistent process for the deployment of this technology and to allow us to actually regulate the introduction of the technology into the rights-of-way in the interest of the public health and safety. So we're trying to balance the various needs, give the public access to this new technology while at the same time preserving safety, health, those kinds of things, aesthetics.
I did notice you were going to keep them out of the Old Salem Historic District, and
That's
I
our
appreciate
intent.
that.
Yes.
Mr. Montgomery?
Yes. This item is actually something that was brought up just last week in the North Carolina League of Municipalities board meeting in terms of a briefing on some of the legislation that was moving there. And from members of the board, from a diverse group of folks from across the state, based on the language that was presented there, did have some reservations in terms of how the current legislation that's worked through General Assembly was written, that really didn't give local governments an opportunity to have any say-so in aesthetics of that conversation. As such, came aware of the work that we were doing here locally and engaging after talking to some of our state representatives who've been engaged in some of that work as well. So I'm happy to hear that the industry is at the table and willing to work through. And that was one of the things that they said very clearly. I think one of AT&T reps responded that, the language that we saw was probably some older language because they were working through trying to figure out something that would be used for continuity's sake across the state in terms of how to access. I don't think that folks are, when you think about the increase currently now in the use of cellular devices, there's going to be more demand. Part of the argument that was brought at the league board meeting was that for more rural parts of the state, that they would see this as an opportunity to expand opportunities for different type of coverage, broadband, and others by using these small cell pieces to expand the access. And so we would see this tension potentially in some of the areas, but even those in some of the rural areas who are at the table still wanted to be able to have some say-so in what things look like. So we don't end up with, riding down any particular neighborhood street, something that is just so aesthetically out of the norm that, it just clearly takes away from the community. But on the other side of that, I think people will benefit from it. So if we're able to have some say-so in it and engage in style and what it looks like, I think that we end up with a benefit for something, but it's something that I think we do have to tread lightly to totally understand.
Mr. McIntosh.
I attended the league meeting over in Greensboro where the industry representatives came and spoke about the just wonderfulness of being able to do this. And there's no doubt that I don't think we need to get in the way of capacity because these small towers are going to be, I think, less problematic than the big towers. We had a very long review of how that process should work, and I think the more small cell towers we have, the less big ones we have. So I think there's a benefit there. But we ran into a situation here in Winston where all of a sudden one of them just popped up in a place that was totally inappropriate. We couldn't figure out who it belonged to, who put it up. Those are the kind of things that we want to avoid. And from anecdotal evidence down in Raleigh, the cell companies are working with the municipality, and there is a conversation. And guys and gals go out on the street and say, "Is it going to work here?" And I think that's the approach that we should take. Is that if there's a reason not to put it there, let's not go spend a whole bunch of engineering money and get into a legal fight about whether it goes there. It seems like it's like our sketch review process that we do would be a good approach to start out in, and just does it make sense here, or do we know we're going to fight a big battle because it's in front of a big residential thing? So I mean, I'm happy to see it moving in that direction, but I think it does need to have input, and city councils need to touch it before it goes into law.
Yes, indeed. And there was a meeting last Wednesday between the league and industry. There's another one coming up. And the meeting last Wednesday was to present Winston's comments along with other municipalities' comments. Some of the things that are important, of course, as Councilmember McIntosh mentioned, requiring the least visually intrusive means, various concerns like that, where it's going to be sited, doing site analysis, requiring site plans to see where the infrastructure will be located, its proximity to utilities and other improvements, a number of things like that.
This is quite different from cell towers because this is going on city property, correct?
Public rights of way. This is what the ordinance
Public
will
right of way.
address. Yes.
Whether it be city or perhaps state DOT. I'm assuming these things are going to go on roads. Mm-hmm. And I think it's incredibly important for the public to know that, we have public roads, we have public right of way, we have a public asset here. And we are now, we regulate signage, we regulate several things that go on the right of way. And so controlling our backyard, as it were, as cities, I think it's vitally important that we that we have a clear say and a determination, and the public even has a right to comment on where these things start popping up. I tend to agree with Councilman Montgomery in that I think we have a lot of cell coverage already in Winston-Salem. I think pretty much not too many dark zones here. But, realistically, if this is going to be an alternative communication device and it's going to go on city property or right-of-ways, not private property, people building cell towers, we've been through that. That's a different game for me. And I think we need to be very careful about opening the door the commercialization of public right-of-way.
I understand, Councilman.
This is an information item, so
Yes.
you'll be bringing back recommendations subsequently. I'm sorry, Mr. Ted? Mr. McIntosh?
City Attorney.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Ms. Garment?
I thought I would just mention that HB 310 is set for hearing tomorrow afternoon at 1. Involved. I will be there already, so I will probably attend that hearing and keep you all posted. But a number of municipalities have issues with that bill because it does take away a lot of authority, municipal authority with respect to rights.
With respect to? Rights of way. And does this go beyond the cell tower, the small cell issue? All right, but yes, and that's very much in keeping with the pattern that the General Assembly has exercised the last several years of taking away municipal authority in a number of areas. So hopefully they'll step back on this occasion, but we'll see.
Yes, some of what's in HB 310 curtails the authority we have under federal and state law currently. So it's kind of a gutting of some of the authority that we have right now.
And I'm strongly in favor of retaining municipal authority over the deployment in the municipal rights of way. I would note that there are actually more dead spots in coverage than you may think, terrain related. You go into a number of spots in neighborhoods in very hilly here in Winston-Salem that your coverage is pretty much dead because the line of sight from the towers is blocked. So the street level feature would actually be a handy tool in a number of those spots. So anyway.
And their purpose is to provide additional coverage and also additional capacity, sometimes spot coverage, where there's a particularly heavy demand.
Okay. All right, so this will be coming back. This is information item. Any other questions on it at this point? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's go to C2, please.
Item C2, information on drainage concerns of property owners along Cassell Street located in the Southeast Ward.
Okay, and let's see, Mr. Taylor, you pull this from consent, but let's get Mr. Turner to give us a briefing on what's involved, and then we'll come back to recognize you for comments or questions.
That's okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the residents along Cassell Street, there are approximately 12 that have a tributary of one of our creeks that runs through the back of their property. And over the years, what has happened is that creek has caused erosion and concerns for the residents. Those 12 property owners have indicated, and the photographic evidence demonstrates, that the creek has caused bank erosion and that has threatened some of the out parcels and backyards with flooding and erosion problems. I understand there was a meeting held with the residents about this and other issues. The cost of the project associated with repairing the roughly 1,200 feet of area of length of the creek is about, well, slightly more than $600,000. Under the city's 70-30 stormwater program, a project can be funded by that program to the maximum extent of $50,000 per property owner. So if you do the math, that works out to exactly $600,000. This project's probably going to be slightly more than that. So they would probably not quite meet the requirements, but if costs were reduced, it's possible that it could get down to the magnitude of a eligible project under the city's 70-30 program. However, the residents have indicated to staff that they don't feel that this is something they should be responsible for, and that the city should take a more active role in solving the problem. The 70-30 policy is adopted by city as an ordinance, and therefore staff implements it according to the direction of council. Be happy to answer any questions you have now or after the public, after any comments.
Thank you. Mr. Stepp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Turner's comments were well-based, and I thank you for sort of queuing us up here. The Southcrest community is a very well-oiled and established neighborhood association. Over the past several years, we've worked together to address some of the problems in their community. I think we've done a significant job. But the looming issue has been exactly what Mr. Turner has described. There is a creek in the back of some of the properties, and you have that information in your packets, both physically and digitally, that are sort of eroding up to some of the neighbors' houses. Now, I think there's a couple of ways that we could sort of look at this. I think the neighbors have indicated to me that they're interested in partnering with the city on the 70/30 program. However, there are some people that are not able or not willing to sort of negotiate with the neighbors, so we can't get sort of a contiguous stream of properties to participate in the 70/30 program. We believe that taxpaying citizens, this is an issue that is urgent and imminent, and it's something that should be addressed. So I think they ultimately like the city to partner with them to pay for these repairs, to support the homeowners, or at least come up with some sort of idea where the 70/30 program can be relevant in this situation. Again, we have taxpaying citizens here who want to participate, but over the years, you have some of the houses who have now have landlords, there are renters there, and they haven't been as cooperative as those that we see here today. And just to get a context of what we're working with, if all the neighbors who are here from the Southwest community could just raise your hands in solidarity to show that we're here in support of this. So as you can see, Mr. Chairman and committee members, council members, the community is here. I don't know how we can address the concerns that they have, but I wanted to bring to this body to have a discussion about how we work with these property owners going forward.
Mr. Montgomery, go ahead.
Well, I had a question in terms of from a timing standpoint. Do we have any information on when the neighborhood first started sharing the concerns about the issue and the erosion issues?
They started sharing with me around 2009, around 2010.
And so likely prior before that as well. And so the reason I asked that question is that those were shared and then coming to city in reference to that. Do we do anything in reference to, even if it's not a total repair of these type of projects, to step in an attempt to mitigate erosion that is happening in any instances like this, in terms of just an attempting to slow down erosion or any progress of things that are happening when we see erosion taking place like this when it's on a piece of property that we have?
One of the fundamental aspects of the city stormwater program is you don't do maintenance on private property. You do, however, authorize under special situations repair projects on those properties. And one of the special requirements of qualifying for that program is that the project has to solve the problem that is being created. And so, no, the answer to your question is no, there hasn't been any temporary or stopgap measure, because under our policy, we have to solve the problem if we're going to do a project. And of course, it's a voluntary program, and the property owners and the city council has to agree to do the project, not something that the city mandates down on property owners.
Right.
Now, that being said, the property owners do have the right, since it's their property, to take any temporary mitigation methods that are authorized or allowed by state rules about creek impacts and things like that.
And the reason I bring that up is the sense of, you have a neighborhood that has been talking or complaining about an issue or a period of time that, because there's nothing that's happened, has only gotten worse over a period of time, and then you get to a place where now physical structures become endangered because nothing has happened.
Yeah. If you look at the map in your materials, you'll see that the stream here actually runs across the backside of the lots. So it's on in the affected area. It's all private property.
Correct.
And while this is a case that involves a fairly high number of property owners, it's not a unique kind of situation. We've seen other instances in which there were some impacted property owners by an erosion problem who wanted to work together and work with the city to develop and fund a project that would mitigate the problems, and some of the private property owners that were unwilling to work together. And there have been other cases when a project that wouldn't work without the cooperation of some private property owners that were unwilling to take part, just didn't get done. And one of the complications here is that because the stream at issue is through this area is running entirely across private property, I don't know that we have, and our attorney could comment further on this, I don't know that we have the authority to require any of the property owners to participate in a project, or even to allow the project to cross the back.
I'm not sure that we do either. Maybe an issue, I guess, adjacent property owner who wants to participate has to bring some action against the other property owner, but I don't know if the city as an entity has the ability to force that property owner.
Mr. Turner, do we know of any assistance programs that are available to help with the costs of a project that involves multiple property owners like this? You know, beyond the city
Beyond the city's
voluntary
participation.
program.
I'm not aware of any, council member. That question has come up before, but we've not seen anything in the private sector as far as other participation in this type of program. There's not a federal program that specifically addresses this, or a state program, and I'm not aware of any private sector, volunteer groups that participate in this sort of thing.
Mr. Larson?
What is the technical solution? There's a lot of kudzu, there's all kinds of debris obviously thrown in this creek. What is the solving the problem comprised of? Is it leaving it daylighted? Is it culvert, or what are we doing?
Definitely leaving it daylighted and laying the hill bank back. The severe erosion has cut vertically down into the ground.
Right.
And so what we would recommend as a solution would be to take that deep trench and lay the hill banks back so that you have a stabilized creek. Now, that does impact the adjacent properties, or not adjacent properties, but the properties where the creek is running through. And so that's a negative impact potentially that has to be considered. But that is the solution to this amount of erosion over the decades.
So it would be quite a lot of engineering, perhaps even on the property owners back behind these 12 property owners.
It would probably stay on the property owner's
Could
property, because you
stay
can
on
see how the creek runs about 1/3 of the way through the property.
So creek stabilization, have we looked at the Clean Water Trust Fund at all? Is that still in existence that we've used?
Not for any practical purposes. I mean, we used to get money from it, but
Are
almost
they
nothing comes
in
anymore.
existence anymore? Do we know?
I don't know that they're in existence.
Yeah.
They are in existence. Their funding is extremely limited, and it's restricted by provisions in the state budget that are highly restrictive. You know, we did a stream restoration project with Salem Creek in the previous decade. It's a wonderful project, sort of a case example of how to do it, but that kind of money is not available from the state currently under the current legislative policy.
Out of the 600,000, we're asking the residents, I'm sorry my math isn't any good, but out of the 12 residents, we're asking them to come up with how much money?
About 12 grand apiece.
Yeah.
12 grand a piece.
11,750.
Yeah. And some of them are willing to do that, but some are not. Is that where we?
I haven't heard that. What I've heard is that they, as a body, would prefer that the city do the project. I don't know that I've heard anybody say that they're interested in that.
Yeah, looking at the photographs, I mean, they're losing major chunks of their property. I don't know how it affects the property values that we're dealing with, but it's pretty, it slashes through, and the kudzu and the debris, and I can only imagine sort of what occupies that waterbed, I would think would be a hazard as well. It's unfortunate we can't find maybe some environmental group or concern that would help provide a partnership with this. I'm not sure where to look for it if we can't find it from the environmental agencies. Is there any other reason for health safety concerns that would move outside of the Clean Water Trust Fund that we could look at? Anything?
I'm not aware of it.
Health and safety concerns?
we've had a project in the past where if there was a public nuisance associated with the severe erosion, then we've ordered it down, but that was a rare example, and I don't think that applies to this particular situation.
That would be a stretch.
Mr. Taylor.
So just speaking on behalf of the community, best case scenario obviously would be that the city would come in and participate at 100% of the cost. However, as I indicated earlier, after meeting with them, I think the issue here is you have two, for example, you'll have two adjacent property owners who are willing to participate in the 70-30 program. And then you'll have one or two property owners that are not, that have not been responsive, and two that will, and a few that have not been responsive, going all the way down the line. And just sort of meeting with them on a regular basis, it's difficult for me to look them in the eyes and just say, hey, as your representative, there's just nothing I can deal with, and I won't do that. I've heard a lot about what we cannot do. What I haven't heard are creative solutions on what we can do. So I don't know if that is seeing if we can force, for lack of a better term, a property owner to comply and assessing the cost to their water bills. I don't know if the answer, well, I have to say it. I apologize, but here we are.
That'd be one big water bill.
Public nuisance, high water.
So if that is not the viable option, I'd like direction from staff on what we can do to try to assist this neighborhood. Now, this isn't unique. It's happened before, but I know in other situations we put together pilot programs, we put together other things to help property owners and business owners that previously did not exist. So what I'm asking you is to hear the pleas and the concerns of these people who are here today, and let's put together a plan to assist them. And I cannot walk away from this table and look them in the eyes and say, I can't and I won't do anything. So I'd hate to filibuster, for lack of a better term, but we've got to come away with some sort of solution. So I take direction from staff or the chairman at this time.
All right, Mr. McIntosh.
This can't be the first time that a neighbor's inactivity has caused damage to the neighbor. What has been done in the past? What have people found resolved in other cases? Is it civil? Is there civil?
That would be my first response, probably a civil matter, because it's something the city can entail or control, but I'll be happy to look into it.
And if there are multiple people that are being impacted, can we get involved in a civil case? Can we provide legal assistance or?
I entirely sympathize with your situation and certainly understand the neighbors' frustrations. This could be one of those cases when we legally do not have the power to compel the technically viable solution. Yeah. Mr. Montgomery.
So my question would be in terms of the actual solution for the erosion, as you stated, in terms of bringing the hillside back out to
Laying the hills, the hill banks back so they're not so steep.
And my question would then be those property owners that are willing to participate in the program itself. Is there an engineer probably find a way to do anything, but a way to figure out those who are willing to participate in such a program can be done, and it preserves those properties, and those other properties who do not want to participate continue to deteriorate as they are. I'm just saying that folks want to participate, and those who do not want to, how do we get to a place of helping those folks who want to participate? I know the policy says we have to rectify the issue, but if they don't want to participate, they ought not be in a place where their inaction causes continual damage to other people's property and prohibit an entire neighborhood from being able to move forward for their properties. And even from a legal standpoint, it'd be interesting for me to know in other places, it may not have been here in Winston, have neighborhoods had success in compelling, a neighbor to do something when it is having that adverse impact on their property, and how we can walk with the neighborhood to get them to a real resolution. Because
we can certainly ask staff to research the questions of what are the legal remedies which might theoretically be available either to the city or to the neighbors as a group, and what, if anything, is a technical option short of the whole 12 property stretch that would work to fix or arrest the progress of the issue on the willing property owner's property. I don't know what kind of technical answer we'd get back from our stormwater management staff. The chief of whom isn't here today because he's not feeling well. But we can certainly ask staff to prepare that information and bring it back for our further review.
I'd most certainly like that, and as soon as we could possibly get it back to committee.
All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I would like to say, since this project is right on the edge of South Ward, if you go just one block further west, you cross Main Street, and then you're in South Ward. And this little creek, do we have a name for it even?
It's an unnamed branch of, ironically, Salem Creek.
Salem Creek, there we go.
Unnamed branch.
Unnamed branch, well, it needs a name.
Trouble Creek.
Trouble Creek. This then goes into my ward, and the folks over on Edward Street have some of the similar concerns. So, this is a problem. I sympathize with the residents. I love daylighted streams. There's nothing more pleasant that becomes an amenity to the property if it can be redeemed. It's not an easy process. It involves some engineering. If you're not careful, you start erosion at the toe of the bank again, and you end up right where you started out in 10 or 15 years. So it's not as simple as just going in and regrading the banks and stuff. I mean, I'm not sure Mr. Turner knows that. We've looked at Salem Creek, we've looked at the creeks around Old Salem and whatever in dealing with these engineering problems as they dig themselves in. But what you've got now is a landscape that's totally out of control. It almost constitutes a health hazard. It almost constitutes a danger, a personal danger for somebody falling over the edges. Right. It moves beyond just the aesthetics of the problem. It begins to threaten the property houses. It begins to threaten the safety of the people living in the houses. It harbors rodents, all kinds of things. So I am very sympathetic in trying to clean up all of our urban streams. The system we have right now only allows a certain amount of investment by the city to that. If the neighbors can come up with pooling their resources together, I understand how neighbor A, who's willing to pay, and neighbor B is not willing to pay, is not fair for neighbor A. And I just think we have to realize that. Now, if there are other funding sources through grants or organizations or churches or whatever that want to participate in this and partner with the city, we're prepared to go 70% right off the bat. The question is, how do you come up with the other 30%? And that's part of the challenge I think the 12 houses have there. And I think we're flexible enough to try to work through this. I'm concerned that $600,000 will not do the project, quite honestly. But from what I know about them. But I think we need to keep looking at this and try to figure it out, because I do think it's a model of an urban stream problem that we have in the city in a variety of neighborhoods, and it kudzu's rampant and whatever. So let's see if we can pay some attention to it and figure out what the model might be that we might ask for. It's going to have to come in part from the neighbors. The neighbors are going to have to do something to help expedite this, because I don't think the city is going to be able to cover the whole wad on the thing as a precedent. But I would like us to see if we can find some solutions, and I'd like to look. I wish we could find some state or federal funding. I know we've relied on it in the past. You certainly have, to try to figure out how to maneuver this, or maybe some different pots of money that we could look at that would act as, because it's got to increase our tax base as well. I mean, this sort of thing will increase the property values, and I think that's worth looking at as well. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we've got a couple of research requests to staff, and we'll get a report back June, July. No, we won't be in
June, August.
June or August. We'll see. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to say I prefer June.
I understand, but on the other hand, this has also been a long-term problem. We'd rather have the right answer come back than, you know.
You know I'm going to do my job, though.
I know.
All right.
I know.
We're going to
We respect that.
Thank you.
We respect that. Okay, thank you very much. Then let's go to item C3, please.
Item C3, information on stormwater concerns of Ms. Doreen Pollock, located in the Northeast Ward.
Okay, this is another information item, and again, Mr. Turner, if you'll report, sort of frame this, and Ms. Pollock has indicated that she would like to comment, and we'll hear her comments as well.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this item actually, or this concern actually came to the committee in the past, several years ago. Most of you have changed from your previous responsibilities and are now on the committee hearing this for the first time. But in essence, Ms. Pollock has a home off of Main Street at 14th Street, and beside her home there is a unbuildable lot that is part of her owned property. That lot is unbuildable because it has a catch basin, or yard inlet as we call it, for stormwater that flows off of the railroad's property to her east, and that is picking up water that flows from some water off of 14th Street, but also water off of the railroad's right-of-way and water off of the post office property to the east of the railroad. So if you look at the diagrams, you'll see a map that depicts that. Ms. Pollock's concern several years ago when we were first involved with this was that that system of storm drainage that comes onto her property is allowing for the transport of trash and also causing standing water in this vacant lot that's to her south. The other concern that well, those are the two primary concerns, the trash and the stormwater that stands occasionally on this lot that is under her control, under her ownership. In order to try to address that problem, we installed some fencing system and some gates in order to try to filter out the trash that comes onto her property. The issue with the standing water we looked at, and unfortunately to solve that problem would require the replacement of approximately 3 or 4 blocks worth of storm drainage system in the public right-of-way to the west of her property and downhill from her property, multi-$100,000 project. At that time, when we discussed this several years ago, that obviously wasn't something that the city could justify, but the remediation treatments that we have put in place on both the railroad's property and on the eastern edge of Ms. Pollock's property in order to filter out the trash were the treatments that we were able to do with the resources that we could justify for the project. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
My question is with regard to the work done on the railroad property. It's notoriously difficult to get the railroad to agree to anything on their property. How were we able to do that?
I'm not at liberty to disclose.
Been advised by council not to tell.
Not to talk.
But that was, they obviously they had to agree to that. So.
Clearly.
It solved the problem. Could I?
Yes,
Mr. Turner, is this a separate tax lot? Or is this all one parcel? Is this all one tax lot, or is this two
It
separate?
shows as one lot on this diagram, but I'd honestly have to go back and double check.
Could we look and see if it constitutes a separate parcel?
Mm-hmm.
And the only other thing I would observe is, and we talked about this briefly, and it may be that it's worth going out there with a transit or something and doing. It looks like coming out of the storm drain, the elevation is 892, and it looks like when you get to the street, it's somewhere around 982. So we got an uphill slope, basically. Is that more or less correct?
From her property to the drainage
Well,
system?
from where I'm looking at where the water's coming out of the culvert, it looks like the elevation is 892.
Yes.
And then by the time you get to the street, at least the way it's sort of flowing right now, I'm trying to think of where the water's going. It looks like you got a reservoir or a pond, a low waller in there that is now maybe holding some of that water. Is that the problem? Yep.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
The 884 is the lowest point.
The 884,
And,
yeah.
of course, the red lines that indicate where the storm drainage are, those lines are deeper than the surface elevations, but the numbers you're seeing there are the surface
Or
elevations.
surface elevations.
Correct.
So there's no way to get the water from 892 elevation into a city storm drain or into a city curb street area at this point in time. Is that what we're understanding? If somebody wanted to lay a pipe, would it be possible for somebody to solve the problem
We'll look at that.
on their based on droppage to have a flow? I'm not suggesting don't get excited that the city's going to pay for this. I'm trying to figure out what the solution is.
Yeah, we'll look at that.
If we've got a waller there, there's no point of filling the hole because the water will just run somewhere else. But if you're trying to move water across the property and not allow it to be standing water, what is the solution?
We'll take a look at that option.
Could
and
we
see.
do that?
That is a
Could we at least
possibility.
understand what the drainage problems are? And I also appreciate the problem with trash flowing across the yard and everything, and it looks like the fencing system is capturing most of that. The chances of working with the railroad to eliminate that water problem, I think, is next near to none. But I think there may be a way to expedite the removal of the water off of the lot if it's ponding. And I just need to know what that technical solution might be. Maybe this is another 70-30 problem. I don't know yet.
Okay, so Ms. Pollock, if you would step up and just for the record, give us your name and address and give us your comments, please.
My name is Doreen Pollock.
Would you like to have a seat, or would you like to use the podium? Okay.
My name is Doreen, excuse me, Doreen Pollock. I live at 1401 North Main Street. I've been at that property for 20 years, and I've had the continuous problem since I've been there. When I moved there, they did not inform me that it was a drainage on the property. If I had known that, I wouldn't have built a home there. And I moved there in like September, and that way I didn't know it, but the next year, 2007, that's when I was cutting grass and I noticed the drainage on the property. You know, I saw this big hole on this side and a big hole on that side. And as the years come, you can, if it rains a lot, you can take a bath and a child can go in there and you can't see the child in the yard. I think I gave some pictures of the last time. These are the pictures from before, where they did come back, I think 8 or 9 years ago, and they filled this hole with dirt. I'll pass it around if you want to see it. The city did. They filled their hole with dirt. And these are the pictures where the trash, if you want to see what he was talking about, used to gather up on my property. And people threw trash and everything on the property. And it'll show you the gate of everything. And there should be a picture on there to show where the dirt has come off and up under the driveway. The city did replace it. Yes, it causes a sinkhole. This is a picture of my home back then.
This is in 1907 that this was put.
Yeah.
Okay.
2007.
I'm sorry, 2007, yeah.
And I have been down here several times concerning that, and I haven't been in a while because I've been going through the death of my husband and my children losing their father, and they haven't gotten over that still, even though they've grown. So these are some pictures as of now. I think somebody came out and took some pictures that I saw online of the yard, but they didn't take a picture all of the yard. I take very good care of my yard. This is my home. If you want to see my home, you'll see pictures of the yard. Now, the ones that I have circled with, this picture here is by the fence. It used to be real small where you couldn't see the brick, so it was about like this. And as the years passed, this is the driveway. the way it is again. All this dirt has washed off up under the driveway again. I can't drive my car back there because I'm scared my car might fall. And these other pictures I have sticks in the yard. I took these yesterday. Everywhere you see sticks is where new holes has formed in the yard. This they filled last time when they did the driveway, and you can see I got Santa Claus in the yard. I did it yesterday to show how deep another sink is in the yard. And these, I'm gonna pass these around. You can see, I see more spots where bricks. I don't know what was there before, even though I grew up in the neighborhood. I don't know they had what y'all have out there? I know it used to be North Elementary School, because I went to the school, and they had something up there. I don't know, remember what it was. But these are all the pictures that I took from my yard on that side where you got different holes forming. I think it's about 20. And I have sticks sticking up so y'all can see the hole. And I can't be the typical grandmother that put swings and stuff in their yard because I'm afraid of my kids being in the yard. I've seen hedgehogs come through the hole. I took pictures of those. I forgot to bring those. They got hedgehogs and everything else coming from the small hole coming across the yard. The water stands about this high when it's rain. All kind of mosquitoes. So I'm scared that my grandkids might catch the West something virus, whatever. So I have to keep the yard. I push more of my yard. I have to cut at least twice a week because I don't want the grass to get high. Also, he said something about rodents. I do have rats flying across the yard. I was promised that they were going to keep it treated, but they do not treat it. And it's just, I've been there 20 years, and I like the neighborhood, but I'm just frustrated because it seems like everything I ask for to help me, I feel that they don't want to help. It's always what we can't do instead of what we can do. And I feel that one of the aldermen last year said something about they building stuff and they're building property, but not telling people what's on the property or up under the property, and they don't find out until they move in there. And I shouldn't have to be going through this. Nobody would cut my yard because one man used to cut it for me, and it broke his riding lawnmower. So I can't put a riding lawnmower out there. I know where the hole's at, so I have to take precautions, and it takes me 3 hours to cut that side yard because I do not want to break my ankle. 5 or 6 years ago, I ended up in the hospital. Don't know why. They said something bit me. They don't know what it was. They thought it was a tick or something, I don't know. But I ended up in the hospital because I pushed more that yard. And I don't want to be bitten again with the standing mosquitoes and everything that's flying in the yard.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pollock. Questions for Ms. Pollock?
Who did you acquire? You built the house?
The house was built through the city. I grew up in the area, and they contacted a lot of the residents that grew up in what used to be Kimberly Projects.
Who did you buy the house from?
I bought the house through the city.
Through the city or from the city?
Through the city. They had a program where, the first-time home buyer program. It was through Sandra Anderson. She the one who built the house.
It was a private builder that we just provided first-time home.
Where did the land? Who owned the land before you? Who owned the land? Who owned the site?
We researched that several years ago. We can pull back up the file.
Yeah, we need to find out. Yeah, and looking at the photographs, it looks like there's already some drainage pipes that have been laid in there, and some holes that may be resulting of some of those pipes collapsing.
It's all kind of bricks, because the first one was like this. Now it's this big.
Yeah.
And if a forklift can't even dig the stone out the yard because we tried.
Right.
And then I was afraid that if I move it, it'll sink again.
Well, holes are caused by something happening underneath them. I mean, right. They're washing out. Right. There's water or something flowing underneath them and causing these sinkholes to be
Right.
created. There's pipes that are collapsing or something, and the problem of the ponding that you're talking about looks like, I mean, I'm not having visited the site, but it looks like there was some attempts at some point in time to address some water drainage off the site. There's various corrugated and even looks like a concrete pipe that maybe leads to the city sewer system, a stormwater system. You know, I don't.
It's a low spot.
It is a low.
There's no surface runoff off of that site because it's the lowest spot.
Right now,
around.
it's a low spot, but the photograph shows some concrete culverts.
Yes, and I also have had trees
right here.
fall on my fence,
Right.
which has damaged my fence.
You're backing up to a bad tenant. I mean, you're a bad owner. You're against the railroad, and that's
I fought
that's
before.
that's a huge problem. I mean, you know, it is, and I think the city's tried to help by mitigating some of the trash that's flowing through their culvert. I mean, the bigger problem that I'm seeing is, you know, you've got water now standing on your land, and I'm trying to figure out why, particularly and why you're getting sinkholes. Because that would indicate something's washing out underneath that property and taking soil with it. So I think if we have some capacity, I'm trying to figure out what our city's actual involvement is and what it'd take to fix it. But again, I'm beginning to lean toward another one of these 30-70 relationships or whatever, which if you're not interested in even pursuing that, I'm not sure.
I'm not gonna do it because when you brought it up to me before when I first moved there, I don't feel I should have to pay 30% of anything,
Yeah.
especially when the situation was hidden from me. Now, if they had told me this situation before that it was a drainage on the yard and I decided I want to move there, then I could see wanting to pay 30%. But all of this from the homeowner, from Sandra Anderson and the city, when I questioned it, they said that I said, why am I getting all this land? They said they couldn't put another house there
Right.
because of the distance from the railroad to the street. They didn't say anything about a drainage. And that's the reason why they couldn't put another house there. They have offered to buy the land back, but I'm not gonna.
Who is they offered?
Mr. Turner has offered this, me to sell that. It's two properties, not one property.
It's two separate tax
Two
farms,
separate properties.
separate tax lots?
It's two separate properties. Because when people look for my address or go on Google to look at, it shows the field.
Okay.
It doesn't show my house.
Okay. I think for me to make any kind of intelligent, whose ward is this?
Ms. Burke?
Ms. Burke.
Ms. Burke, she has addressed the issue with Mr. Turner and Mr. Garrett here as well.
We can bring, if you want to hold it, we can bring back.
I think we need a little more information. I need to know, you know, sort of what the city's role in this is. If we simply help finance your house, and that's all we did as a city, and we never took title to the property, and we never had any fingers on the house at all other than giving you money or helping you buy the house, our responsibility is, I think, very limited other than sort of a moral idea to help you out, you know, which I think I'm sort of willing to look at. But it would require some effort on your part as well. To try to figure out how to solve it to get the water off your site. I think we could send some people out and see if we can figure out what the heck's going on out there, because I think there's some drains and some other things that are going on that maybe we can look at and help solve that problem. I don't know what the cost of that would be, and you'd probably have to incur some of that at a minimum, you know, if you want to engage that. But I don't know that we're prepared at this point to answer any of that. I need to kind of understand what the city's obligation is legally at this point, if any, to this property owner, and then what the problem is. Meanwhile, if we have an engineer that wants to go out there and poke around, you'll let the city get on your property and look at it.
On my property, I don't have no problem with that.
Well, and see if there is see if there's something to be done as a courtesy to you. I think that would be. I mean, I'd be willing to help support that.
I appreciate that, Mr. John, but can I ask one question? When the city decides to allow people to build homes on property, do they not have a responsibility to us to let us know what's
Very limited, actually.
wrong with the property.
I mean, I think unless the city owned the property and transferred it to you under false pretense of some sort. You know, it's like any homeowner, any buyer, you know, you're going to have to go back to the original owner of the property.
Do you know who the original owner is?
I don't know that yet. I haven't, I mean, we'd have to do deed traces on it and what have you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, I just want to say again, we're sympathetic to your situation. In most situations, when we buy things and property, it is usually buyer beware, and that is a very, very sad state. And I think in the last case that we looked at, we were trying to figure out what the legal recourse could be to the other property owners that did not want to participate in the program. I think the community understood because it was private property that it was their property and they had some level of responsibility. So I guess another question I direct to staff is what legal recourse does the current property owner have for the prior or the previous property owner? And I understand what you're saying. If the city owned it, if we had title, we didn't inform you, then I guess the liability would be with the city. But because we never had it, owned it, or held title to it, and we just sort of helped you to finance the deal, I don't believe that the obligation would be to the city, but it might be to the previous property owner. So could you research that or tell me now what that?
Her buyer, the seller, was Anderson and Associates. I need to check behind that to see if perhaps we did own it, because I think it's an urban renewal area. Got to check.
Okay.
I don't want you to think we did have ownership at some point in the chain, but her predecessor title was Anderson and Associates.
And before I can make a decision further about how we might move, and I'm just one vote in this car, in this wheel, but I need that information in order to move forward.
All right, so we've got a couple of information requests to staff. Mr. McIntosh, you had it.
What was the year that you purchased this property?
1996.
Okay. North Carolina state law only requires you to keep records on these for 3 years. So finding the original purchase contract might be difficult. If this were a transaction that were taking place today or had taken place recently, this kind of situation would be a material fact, and you could not conceal that as a seller. You would have to disclose that that existed. But since it's so far back, I'm not sure that evidence is going to be available that could prove that.
What you mean so far back? Because I complained the year I bought
No, just unless you have an original copy, a copy of the original purchase agreement.
I wouldn't have access.
Yeah, and the seller is not required to keep that beyond 3 years. So that's only back to 2014. So finding that kind of evidence would make a civil case more difficult, although not impossible. But if you can prove that the seller covered up the fact that that was an issue,
right,
then you have cause to collect damages from the seller.
So where we go from here?
We've got a couple of information requests in for staff that come back to the committee. At this point, we don't immediately have before us any action item that we can take. We have 2 specific information requests to staff to report back.
Say that again.
Okay. There isn't anything we can do for you today, legally.
Oh, not today.
That's correct.
Okay.
And we've asked 2 questions to staff. They're going to research and let us know whether they see anything else that we can suggest.
Would I know that?
We will make sure that information is conveyed to you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And may I?
Yes.
And I don't think that this committee is saying that we don't want to do anything. We're saying we want to do whatever we can to assist you, but legally we don't know what that is. But when they come back with that information, then we'll know how we can move. And how we move might be able to say we can't do it. But
I can understand it because I'm not too, I'm not rich, but.
I can't tell.
What?
I thought you were rich when you sit down.
Oh, well. If I have to get a lawyer, I'll get one.
I'm kidding around, but I just want you to understand, we're not saying we're not going to do anything. We just need some information before we are able to make a
I
decision.
understand, Mr. James Taylor.
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to be clear. Because when you said what, I wanted to make sure you understood before you left the table.
Yeah, 'cause
Yes,
I know
ma'am.
I've been told some stuff before.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Did you get my email?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And so we knew to expect you. We
All right.
set aside time for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I believe that completes the consent agenda, so we can go back and start with the 5 items on the general agenda. With G1, please.
Item G1, public hearing on ordinance to name an unnamed easement in the 600 block of Stewart Road, easement to be named Broken Cedar Lane, located in the East Ward.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hamby? Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Montgomery?
Well, go ahead.
Okay.
I didn't eat one. Do we want to go ahead? For the
I'd like to have a staff report for the public.
A very brief one, please.
Okay. Got to get this one started up here, so.
You might just give us a verbal summary. We don't need the slideshow.
Say,
Just tell them what you want.
there's 4 dwellings on this easement. 4 triggers the naming of the easement. We've contacted, mailed letters out to the property owners. Their suggestion was Broken Cedar. We've met the general statute by posting in the newspaper, posting in 2 public places, and that's our recommendation to accept the naming of Broken Cedar for the easement extended north off of Stewart.
So this is staff's recommendation. It has consensus approval of the property owners adjacent.
We have received feedback from 2 property owners. We haven't had any contact from 2 other owners.
So the 2 that contacted said thumbs up.
Yes, sir.
All right, and nobody's complained. So the action of this committee would be to send it to a public hearing. Is that correct?
The action is to have a public hearing
Have a public hearing.
and then make a recommendation to full council.
All right, so we will, if it's the pleasure of the committee, there would be in order to make a motion to set a public hearing on this matter.
It's,
to have
it's now.
Today is a public hearing.
It's now.
So it's our pleasure. Let's do it.
All right. Okay.
All right.
Very good. All right. The public hearing is open. No one has signed up to comment on this matter. Is there anyone here who wishes to comment on naming of easement off the 600 block of Stewart Road, Broken Cedar Lane? I see no hands. The hearing is closed.
I move approval of item G1.
Second.
All right. Discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That is approved.
Well done.
Item G2, please.
Item G2, public hearing on ordinance to rename Erling Parman Drive between East 16th Street and East 17th Street to Maple Street, located in the Northeast Ward.
All right. Summary, please.
Yes, sir. As you may remember, we had a request to rename Maple Street between 3rd Street and 5th Street to Erling Parman Drive, but that was a conflict with our street naming policy that we couldn't duplicate street names. The original street naming for after Ms. Parman was done between East 16th Street and East 17th Street. I think it was the ceremony was held in December. This would move Maple Street back up to East 16th and East 17th Street and name the section between East 3rd Street and East 5th Street after Ms. Parman. I have contacted Ms. Tracy Ingram and Abdul Bey, who was the original property owner, and both are agreeable to this switch.
So essentially, this puts Senator Parman's name on the more visible section. Okay. And so we've got another public hearing.
Yes, sir.
Here. The public hearing is open. No one has signed up to comment on this matter. Does anyone wish to comment on this matter? Again, I see no hands. Therefore, we will close the public hearing, and a motion is in order.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That is unanimous. Thank you. And we have item G3, please.
Item G3, handicap parking on Teresa Avenue and Goldfloss Street for information only.
Mr. Turner, report, please.
Mr. Chairman, we're actually asking for approval of this one. Approval of the handicap ordinance amendment for on-street parking.
And it's 4 on-street handicap parking spaces at 324 Goldfloss Street, adjacent to Pine Chapel Moravian Church.
Correct.
Okay.
And 2 spaces on Teresa Avenue, adjacent to Fondley Avenue. The situation with the Goldfloss is a church that has a conflict with adjacent property owner across the street, and has a need for handicap parking to address that issue, specifically, of course, during church services when they have patrons who are there. Their issues go beyond just the handicap issue, but we feel that putting in a handicap on-street parking will help to address or begin to address some of the problems that they're having with the inter-neighborhood conflict. The issue on Teresa Avenue is a sight distance problem as you approach the intersection of Teresa and Fondley from Fondley. The property owner where we're proposing the handicap parking has a number of vehicles that they currently park on the street. We had planned and in fact had installed no parking signs to ban all of the parking along the street. The property owner then contacted us and notified us that they had a handicap situation. So we're proposing that 2 handicap spaces be established by City Council and that the rest of the parking along there be banned by City Council delegated authority to staff. Be happy to answer any questions on either one of these, which do not require a public hearing.
That was going to be my question. Questions for Mr. Turner?
I have no questions for Mr. Turner, but I'd move to approve this item if there are no further questions.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, all right. Discussion.
I have discussion on this. I have no concerns at all about the handicap parking at a church location where you have a consistent owner in place as we have downtown, where we have a public sort of venue. I do have some concern about moving handicap parking onto public streets into residential areas where ownership changes, hard to recognize the need. In this particular location, you've got a driveway, you've got a walkway up to the front door that doesn't connect to the street sidewalk. It doesn't really function as a handicap venue in my mind. It functions more as a traffic control device. And if we need to keep traffic pulled back from the corners of the street, then we have no parking there, whatever, if you need to control that. But to open up handicap parking in private residential areas over the long term, a proliferation of handicap parking spaces with changing ownership and changing conditions, I think is going to ultimately come back to haunt us. So I would not recommend at this point that we allow handicap parking on Teresa Avenue, but we do support handicap parking at the Pine Chapel Church.
Mr. Taylor, this is your motion. Do you have further discussion?
Not at this time.
Mr. McIntosh?
Do we have, is this precedent setting? Have we done this in the past?
Yeah, everything is precedent setting. The first time that we did this was last month, and we did the 4 locations downtown. So these are the next 2, and one is precedent setting in that it is in a institutional area. This is also precedent setting in that it is in a residential neighborhood. But committee may recall that when we considered the ordinance for the folks who were pushing for the on-street handicap parking, we had originally proposed to just limit it to the central business district. And there was a desire that they had that it be beyond that to cover areas adjacent to the downtown area that were outside of the central business district. And as we considered their request, we said, well, let's just drop the restriction on it being in the central business district. Then the very week that the council was considering the ordinance at the council level on handicap parking, the issue came up with Teresa and Fondley. And so what we told the citizen was, let us see what the city council decides to do relative to handicap parking on the street. And if they approve that, then we'll ask them to consider whether they would wish to do it for this location.
Mr. Taylor?
My comments are brief. Did I interrupt you, Mr. McIntosh? I just think the point of doing it downtown was to make downtown accessible to those who may have disabilities. And I don't think that we need to have a different mindset when it comes to residential communities. There are those who have disabilities in residential communities. We should and ought to be accommodating to them. So I'm supporting it.
All right, and this is a case in which there was a proposal to simply do no parking along one side of the street at this point.
Correct. If you well, it's hard to see from the diagram, but Fondley comes up toward the intersection of Teresa in the distance of the map that's in your package. And unfortunately, the sight distance was severely restricted by the vehicles that were parked all along this section. What staff concurred as a compromise, considering the accommodation request, was to allow the parking for 2 spaces along the western edge of this person's property nearest to the driveway, and to restrict the parking the rest of the way to the corner.
So are these individuals in front of the house handicapped?
They have handicap placards.
They have handicap placards for this
Yes.
house?
Mhm.
How many vehicles?
She said she had a handicap placard, the citizen who called me. We put in 2 spaces to provide reasonable accommodation, but she indicated that she had one, so you could assume 1, but we provided 2.
So is this for traffic control at the corner, or is this to address a handicap-specific need for a specific occupant at a specific time?
Both.
Further discussion? Yes.
So the threshold that we're setting here, the precedent we're setting here, is all you have to do is ask for one.
Well, we found that it was reasonable, but we didn't see any reason to turn it down based upon any direction that we've gotten from council thus far. But certainly if there is a desire to have it have some restrictions beyond those that we've heard thus far, we'll be perfectly willing to take those into consideration and bring you back a revision to your ordinance that incorporates those.
Yeah, I would like us to spend a little more time looking at this residential impact and what it would have on neighborhoods. I have no problem at all with public facilities, churches, parking lots or whatever. But once we get into the neighborhoods and we start tagging, designating spaces that we're going to have a hard time monitoring, a hard time reversing, that I think this is a different area from where we started the conversation. And I would like to have this part pulled, and I don't know whether I do this in a friendly amendment or what, the residential component pulled off of this, allow the Pine Street to go forward, and send back to staff to look at the ramifications of doing this, because I can just see this proliferating, and before we know it, we're not going to have any even enforcement capability.
Mr. Montgomery.
In the fact that we have existing opportunities in neighborhoods now for different restricted parking, such as permitted parking, that a person could in fact request permitted parking for a section and receive the same type of allocation of parking spaces, such as the handicap, in theory, by using a permitted parking request for a particular section.
There are some restrictions on what you have to have in terms of contiguous blocks, but yes, there are special situations that the council has approved for permit parking for neighborhoods where they have a significant amount of intrusionary parking.
Right. And the reason I say that is that I don't see the handicap request in residential too different than permitted parking in residential areas, because it all goes into a place of restricting on-street parking to a specific use. Although this is a little, we have a whole litany of things when we look at permit parking on some of the things and people and all that kind of stuff of agreeing and all that thing to get the permitted parking. But folks they can ask for whatever they want. It's up to the council on whether or not we approve the requests as they come. And I think it should be, in most instances, that based on what is seen as positive or negative impact on specific areas, and I'm not certain that a general addition would significantly change what we're looking at on that.
Mr. McIntosh, and then I'm going to call some process on it.
To me, the difference is with permit parking, you have to have buy-in and agreement between of a certain percentage of the neighborhood. And there are several parts of my ward that have permit parking on it, and it's sometimes a contentious process where people don't want to lose the space. Here, this is essentially one person saying, I'm going to block off this section. And in here, this particular case doesn't look like a problem, but I could see it being in West End or in some other neighborhoods where the density is pretty tight. Just because somebody has a handicap placard, all of a sudden that they've got those spaces to themselves whereas right now they don't. Right now it's free.
Just to be clear, right now, they park along the entire segment without conflict because there's no parking restriction. This would establish a parking restriction on 2/3 of the area they're currently parking in.
Right. Which staff can do without city council. You've got delegated authority to put up the no
To
parking.
ban the whole thing, but the feedback that we got was that they needed the accommodation because of a handicap.
And I would add, we've had an accident at this corner, and the neighbors and the council member of the ward have been actively involved.
So I'm sorry. Has the remainder of the street been designated no parking except for these 2 spaces?
No, we initially banned everywhere from the driveway of this property into the back of the screen, if you will, to the intersection with Fondley. And that's when we got the feedback about the problem of not being able to park there and needing to park there. So the only area that has temporarily been banned was the area from this driveway to the corner.
Is there anything that would prevent you from sticking no parking signs from the end of where you're proposing to designate no parking over to the intersection?
No. We could certainly do that if that's the desire of the committee to hold on the decision about the handicap and just establish or allow staff to establish the planned no parking zone from the end of the proposed handicap parking zone to the corner.
Is there, who's doing the parking on this block? Just a lot of folks in the area?
No, the adjacent property owner. The residents who live at this home, as far as we can determine, are those who are parking.
They've been using they've got a bunch of vehicles and they've been using it.
Correct.
All right. I'm inclined to, I was going to point out that it would be at the pleasure of the committee to separate the 2 items and act on them independently, or to continue to take it as one motion.
Mr. Chairman, because we considered the original 4 previously in previous discussions with a great deal of deliberation as a group, I feel comfortable that those 4 in the ordinance, but as I understand it, this ordinance now has been coupled onto with 2 more. I would like them separated, and if we want to take them up tonight, we can take them up individually on the merits of them. Like I said, we just stop with that.
Yes. Well, what's the pleasure of the committee?
I would move we separate them, if that would supersede, I guess.
Well, actually, that would be a motion to amend.
To amend.
That's in order.
Okay.
It would require a second. Of course, the original mover and seconder could accept that as a friendly amendment or not. That's in y'all's prerogative. Do you want to move the 2 as one motion, or are you willing to accommodate the request to separate them?
I'm willing to accommodate the request to separate them for discussion purposes with Councilmember Larson. However, I do think we will need to look at the policy. So I'll allow it, the friendly amendment.
If Mr. Montgomery, will you permit that as a friendly amendment?
For the sake of time.
All right. So then we will vote on them separately.
Question.
Yes.
The council members within the proximity of these areas, what are the neighbors' conversation?
Let's see, Mr. Taylor, do you represent the Gold Floss Street area, or is that Councilmember Burke?
Well, I think that's Mr. Larson.
No, Gold Floss.
And I represent a part of Gold Floss, and we split that.
It's actually yours, I think.
Right.
All right.
I move for approval.
All right.
Plus.
Move for approval of Gold Floss. Second? All right. Discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, no? All right. That's unanimous. Now, a motion on the second item is in order.
I move we table this and ask staff and look into the matter of enforcement and long-term impact of establishing handicap in front of private residences.
I'll take that as a motion to hold in committee. Is there a second?
I'm not a fan. I'll second it for discussion.
All right, seconded for discussion.
I'm not a fan of what I consider to hold projects hostage, so to speak, in order to have a policy discussion. We're going to have a policy discussion, let's do that, but it's a tool in the box, and we should utilize it as long as it's there. If we don't want it to be there, then let's have that discussion.
Okay. Mr. Montgomery, any comments?
Well, and I understand Councilman Larson's question around in connection to the downtown conversation, but I see those being quite different in the sense of the conversation around downtown being much more of a place of a communal spot that is there for everyone who's coming in. This is a neighborhood which the neighbors and how they engage is much more important than what 200,000 other people think about coming into a particular area. And so for me, that is much more reason why I'm supporting if it gets to the point of what is at odds in the neighborhood and community and meets the need that they're requesting, then for me,
right,
that's the crux.
Okay.
As opposed to us looking at a more central location where many people are coming in, and so thus we have to take into consideration not only those who are there, but also other people who are coming into the area. And that's the piece that I see as different.
All right. So the motion is to hold in committee. Those in favor of holding in committee, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no.
Yeah.
Okay. The motion fails 1-2. Then is there another motion? Is there a motion for approval to recommend? I tell you what, is there a motion to send this forward to the council without a recommendation?
Out of respect for Mr. Larson's concerns, I would move to send this forward without a recommendation, but let's consider his concerns, and if it needs to be sent back at that particular time, I'm okay with that, but I see no reason to do that at this time.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second, but I want to turn to the question of study, of the need to examine that. I think that that's a pertinent question and concern that needs further deliberation if there's going to be additional impact from other areas. The point of a particular neighborhood, and I've taken this place where we talked about speed bumps, humps, or anything else, that if the neighborhood comes and this is what they agreed upon and want in their neighborhood, they're going to have to live with the pros and cons of what that means for them in their neighborhood. If it's something that somebody else comes in and wants for them, that's different. But if they say, this is what we want, we're okay with it, then they wrestle with the implications of that.
Right.
See, that's part of the problem I have tonight is this thing is thrown up, and we've had no public input. It's have a major policy change, and I'm just not ready to support it at this point in this configuration.
Okay. Just for the record, in terms of informing staff, I don't see adverse safety impacts of designating two handicapped parking places at this location. I also don't see any need to do that. You could simply designate the rest of the block as no parking to address the safety concern and leave this available without restriction. I don't see a strong pro or con here. I don't have any problem sending it forward without a recommendation, giving us an opportunity to confer with the council member representing the area. Is there further discussion?
None.
All right. Those in favor of sending this to the council without a recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? All right, that's approved. Thank you. And we do have, as understood, that we're asking staff to also bring back to this committee additional information and thoughts on policy implications of using this on a broader scale.
Right.
So basically, the box is open, and I anticipate that we will start getting requests for this. I agree that we ought to consider standards.
Should have a policy discussion.
There we go. Let's go to item G4, please.
Item G4, information concerning WISTA rate increase for TransAid services to be used for revenue enhancement to TransAid operations consideration.
All right, this was presented to Finance Committee yesterday. Most of us were here. Mr. Cole, were you here at that time?
I was not, but I did see the
Right.
presentation.
Okay, do we need a representation of this?
No, I definitely don't.
All right. I have some additional information requests. I don't need them today. I don't think you could provide them today. But this is an information item, not an action item today. We will be looking at this as an action item during our budget process. For preparation for that discussion, I'd like to have the information. How many individuals currently qualify to use TransAid in Winston-Salem? So how many discrete passengers are we talking about potentially at this snapshot in time, in a year? How many of them qualify for the Medicaid exemption that's currently available? Basically, I think it would be helpful for us to understand how many individuals are impacted by the availability or non-availability of that exemption. We may or may not be able to get that information, but I'd like for us to try. What community agencies currently are involved in providing transportation-related assistance or financial assistance to individuals in need in the community? What agencies are out there providing help for folks who have trouble affording transportation in the form of, say, bus passes? Is there any legal impediment to Winston-Salem, including a budget line item that would provide a certain number of monthly passes, 10 ride passes and 30 ride passes, to agencies, designated agencies, for them to provide to clients on a needs-tested basis? That's what I'm thinking of. Okay. And those are the four questions that I would like to have available for us to consider, because it seems like we've got two separate but related issues here. We got one, what do we need to do for the health of our overall transportation system? There is an identified problem. The growth in demand for TransAid services, if it were to continue at its current rate, is effectively unsustainable. 24% plus growth rate in the ride demand over the past 3 fiscal years and accelerating. That's not viable for the system as a whole. On the other hand, we have some individuals who would be apparently distressed financially if they have to pay even $1 a ride. So is there a way we can address both issues simultaneously? I'm thinking perhaps there is. Might be able to make the change to the fare structure and address the unlimited sort of rise in demand for services, and still provide a means of providing help directly to the people who would actually be most distressed by the change on an individual basis. I was thinking, might we, for example, do a revenue neutral calculation in our overall budget, calculate what we would expect to come in from revenue for TransAid rides, additional revenue, and allocate that projected amount to passes that would then be distributed to folks who need it, through these community agencies that are already involved in that effort. That or some, form of that as a way to deal with both ends of the problem side of things. And so if we can have that information available for our consideration, I would appreciate that. Okay. Mr. Montgomery.
There was a question I was asking yesterday in reference to the information that was provided, and just wondering if there was additional, I know the comments were heard yesterday, but was there potentially already captured somewhere more qualitative information from some of the meetings on more in-depth information on the comments from folks. I know they were specific in terms of kind of yes, no, maybe so, kind of where individuals were, but was there any more content beyond what we saw yesterday?
We'll pull something together and get that to you if we've got it.
Okay.
And there may be informative details involved in that testimony.
Correct.
Okay. Other questions?
No,
All right.
no questions, but a comment.
Please feel free, Mr. Bell.
As you probably knew, I'll be extremely brief. I want to thank the citizens for always coming out and commenting. I'd like to thank the staff for their hard work for putting this package together. Mr. Bessie, the chairman, you were always thoughtful and methodical when you do things, especially on this particular issue. So I thank you for being that. I almost feel like, the green eggs and ham book, because I don't think I'll move. I mean, I have not supported this. I do not support it, and I will not support it when it comes to us for an action item. However, if it does pass, I'd ask, and I know that you are thinking sensitively, by the questions that you're asking, that we be sensitive to those who are vulnerable in our city. And it's just not something that I'm looking to support, but if it passes, thank you for being sensitive as possible.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Then we have the final item, G5, please.
Item G5, Business 40 Mitigation Strategies Plan Update.
All right, thank you. And this is a presentation by, I believe the presentation plan is from Hart only, unless we have a additional presentation from Winston-Salem DOT at this point.
No, just Hart's going to be doing the presentation on the work of the group.
Very good. Mr. Ryan, if you would introduce yourself and your colleague and present, please.
Yes, sir. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Scott Ryan. I pleasure of serving as Executive Director for Piedmont Authority for Regional Transportation. Here with me this evening is Mark Kirshner, who is our Director of Planning. Wanted to bring to you some information. You have some handouts there available. We're going to go through this slide very quickly. I know we're the last on your agenda. How much time do we need to focus on for your...
Well, it's 10 to late, so you've been very patient in waiting. Let's compress.
Yep.
Go for 10 minutes.
Just wanted to ask, we live and die transportation. We can be here all night, but we don't want to do that to you.
Right. I'd be happy to stay at 8:30 on, but I don't know that all my colleagues are.
I certainly understand. I'm going to turn over to Mark. We're going to go through and provide you some information. I wanted to give you just some higher level topic of discussion of where we're at, where this came from. It was essentially a year ago that I was interested that Pat Ivey, our division engineer for Division 9 of NCDOT, had mentioned or spoke to me following a presentation that was given to the Park Board on the construction activities related to Business 40. I'm assuming that everyone in this room recognizes what Business 40 closure is happening. That I only do that a little bit with levity because not everybody in our region recognizes what this project is and what it's going to do transportation-wise that we all recognize as far as impacts.
This committee has been briefed.
Yes, and Pat Ivey had approached me just over a year ago and asked, is this something that the part agency would be willing to explore to see if there are certain things that could be done above and beyond our construction realm of the Business 40 project. Have examples that we're going to go through and share with you as far as what's been done in Raleigh, what's being done in Charlotte, what's been done in different parts of the country. We have some other things we want to share with you as far as what we recognize. But essentially, we have a draft plan with regards to mitigation strategies related to mobility and transportation outside of the region coming into downtown, as well as different things in downtown for disbursement as well as your businesses. Now, there's been a great deal of working groups, and like I said, over a year ago, there was working groups established dealing with incident management, dealing with marketing, dealing with specifically DOT investments as well as local investments. And I will stop there because Mark will go through some slides and give you some of that information, give you some of that detail. And we are here to answer any questions that you have. and go into any details as that your time permits.
Thank you.
So you're very familiar with that slide, so we can kind of skip that one. Other than to let me say that we have tried to keep track of the most current information in terms of when the construction is taking place. So any analysis that you see here, we hope is up to date with that. You're very familiar with the schedule. The only thing I would like to point out here is that we have been working, as Scott mentioned, for quite a while on these particular strategies and ideas, and that once the construction project with the closure actually hits, there will be some of these strategies that will already have been in place, and some that will move all the way through, some that will end before the end, and things of that nature. But we've been tracking very closely with NCDOT. These are some of the partners and collaborators that we've had in terms of these discussions taking place. And there have been several group meetings that included those parties. These ideas are not foreign to you. Again, you've had these conversations. We're going to really focus on the first three. The status of downtown is something that we've heard from the chamber, that they want to make sure that the public is aware that downtown remains open. We want to try to address those first three, at least in terms of keeping some of the traffic out. A number of strategies that were identified there that you can look at a later point. Again, the whole idea is to try to create a traffic relief zone and do little things that we can to keep traffic out of that area. This is not an unusual effort on FHWA's part in terms of funding some of these strategies with a construction project, but I would say we haven't found a case yet where an interstate highway has been closed down completely. So this is a very unique situation from that standpoint. But being a close neighbor over in the adjoining county, I admire the city in terms of tackling this and saying, let's just close this for 2 years and let's get it done. So it's going to be rough during that period, but I think some of the things that you've already done sort of help address that. But there are a number of strategies. You can call them all transit, but we'll talk a little about carpool and vanpool as well, that other areas have used with some success to be able to limit the number of vehicles. You are probably aware that within the downtown area, there's about 40,000 people that work there. You may or may not be aware that about a little bit over 50% of those live within 10 miles. So if you start to think about trying to get people to change their behavior and use something other than just getting in their car every morning, that 10 miles is a pretty short distance. It's something that you might want to live with, but something that we hope that WISTA benefits from during the closure. So our strategies are really kind of looking outside of that 10-mile radius because of that. This is just a slightly different view. The area that's there in yellow in the middle is the downtown, and then what we're calling the traffic relief zone, which is an area that NCDOT had identified previously. It just gives you a little bit different look in terms of this is a graph of where people live that are working within that yellow area there in the center. So you can see the bulk of the people within that 10-mile radius. And if you're good with geography, you can see Kernersville over there to the right just a little bit. So you sort of get a feel that right in that downtown core area, most of the people are working within that 10 miles, and even most are working within a 25-mile radius. So that is the traffic relief zone. We expanded it just a little bit from what NCDOT used originally to do some outreach. And the reason being is that when we run our regional travel demand model, this is some of the congestion impact that you see. So the areas where you see red are areas that are going to have more congestion when the closure takes place. So the traffic relief zone that we're targeting with one of the strategies matches up really well with the congested area. So there's basically three components to the strategies. One is congestion management, and there's one piece of that is NCDOT's. While they have cameras, the signboards that you see on the side of the highways, and people that help manage accidents when they happen. This, again, is an extraordinary event, and there's an opportunity for them to gain some more equipment as well as personnel. Again, their main focus in incident management is to clear that accident as soon as possible. I know I learned something during this process that I always like to share, and that is for every minute that an accident has occurred and there's congestion, it takes 4 minutes to clear it. So you can see how one accident can really cause congestion on a roadway and can really have an impact for a long time. So the quicker that accident is cleared, the quicker traffic can get moving again. In terms of some of the strategies, particularly putting people in van pools or carpools or on transit, this is the basic idea. And this is nothing new if you're in the transit world, but I can fit more people on a bus and take up less space than the number of cars that it would take for those people. And that's what we're trying to do in this traffic relief zone. If we can do something to limit the number of cars that are coming into downtown, it will help keep the other traffic flowing freely. So this is currently our part system, and we have several routes that are coming in and out and serving Winston-Salem in various manners. We are going through some service changes, so it does say part system in 2018. This is what we think that it will look like in 2018. And what we are proposing in terms of providing some mitigation and relief is to establish some park and ride lots that are kind of outside that 10-mile buffer, outside of the city limits, outside of Worcester service area, and provide people with an opportunity to connect into that park and ride lot and catch a shuttle that's running at a fairly high frequency and move on into downtown. To one of those, the one to the north, the King lot, is actually a park and ride lot that Park has currently. And that line that is shown there is currently our Route 6 that comes out of Surrey County. We have some capacity on that route, so that wouldn't be a separate vehicle. We would just try to market that route more in terms of people using that. Moving clockwise around, the orange area would be in Kernersville, and we do have a route that goes from Kernersville to Winston-Salem, as well as a route that goes from our hub into Winston-Salem. We would again market those very heavily, but establish a more prominent park and ride facility in that Kernersville area and run that shuttle at a little higher frequency, hopefully to capture some people. Down to the south, about the Midway area, we again currently have, but will most likely not have, an 18er route that comes up 52. But again, the idea would be to establish a park and ride lot there, provide a shuttle. And then on the west side, the current thinking is to establish something both in Clemens and Louisville, pick people up in both of those locations and move them into downtown. We are really chasing after the choice rider here with this effort. So it's got to be very attractive for people to want to use that. It's got to be something that we feel like is special to them, for them to be able to do that. If not, they would be riding transit today. And we just don't have the type of ridership that we would certainly hope for. So one question that I think the city could help us with, that we're struggling with a little bit, is what happens when we do get downtown with these shuttles? Do they circulate around themselves? Do we have some sort of transfer point? Is there something that the city might be doing at the time that it's closed in terms of a downtown circulator? And I think these are things that we can certainly continue to work through as we get closer to the closure. So those were the three options there: the shuttle circulating around downtown, transferring onto some sort of circulator itself, or just transferring onto Worcester. But again, we feel like that to be able to chase that choice rider, this has got to be dropping people off, not at their front door, but at least at their front door or a couple doors down for them to be able to utilize it. In terms of incentives, the one target or the one thing that I would emphasize is what we would be calling an express pass program. And what we would be doing is targeting downtown businesses and offering them the opportunity to provide transportation to their employees through carpools, van pools, or the use of transit, and paying for that transportation through this FHWA grant. So people that are working downtown would have to get these express passes from their employer, so they would provide some control there, and then the monies from the FHWA would be helping to pay for that. Under communicating and marketing, there is certainly a very large effort by NCDOT as well as the city in terms of keeping people informed about the construction project when it closes. Our efforts would focus on the shuttles and the other incentives about the express pass and people using our carpooling and van pooling on a daily basis to do that. And then, of course, we would need some sort of project administration for this. So when you roll that up, it's a fairly big number. This is not too unusual. The number is $9.5 million to implement. Most of that is in running those shuttles because of the high frequency, and then the incentive program trying to provide people some incentive to not drive in their single occupancy vehicle. The Triangle asked for 11 in their project, and they're projected to use somewhere around 9. So we don't think this is out of line with what's been asked with before, but it certainly seems to be a pretty big number. Our next steps is we would hope to submit our funding request to FHWA here in June or July. And then once approved, we would begin meeting with some groups that are already meeting in terms of the construction and establishing some regular meetings concerning the implementation, finalized performance criteria with FHWA. I would note one thing about all of these strategies, and this is true for any other place that has used them. If they're not working, we'll stop them. If no one's riding that shuttle, we're not going to waste anyone's money, but there may be an opportunity to shift that money to another strategy. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions? Yes, Mr. Ratcliffe.
How concentrated, how dense is our downtown workforce? How dense, I mean, I'm trying to get at what you think the chances of success are of approaching employers to get their buy-in. How many, what will be the impact of, we've got Inmar and those folks. I mean, is that low-hanging fruit? Is that going to be pretty successful, you think?
I can tell you this, to start answering the question, and that is we do know that if we can reduce the number of vehicles coming in by 7 to 15%, we could probably have the congestion where it was pre-construction. Now that equates to some 150 cars a day coming in and out. I think it goes back to that whole argument of chasing the choice rider, which we do in transit, which y'all know is difficult. And it is about making it something that is special just for them. Most of us will jump on an airport shuttle when we're traveling in the drop of a hat, but most of the rest of us won't ride public transit. So it is something about making it special, making it frequent, and making it affordable.
Can you serve beer?
Probably not with FHWA money, but I'm sure that if there's a little stand in each park and ride lot off to the side, that is a good possibility.
Thank you.
Over the 12, 13 months that we've been working with different groups and developments, there has been conversations with different folks at Federal Highways. They recognize with what the road closure could be as far as a magnitude impact for downtown Winston-Salem. They've not closed the door with the ideas, but also Mark did make a very good point, and this is very much a stressed element. If it's not working, very good. We know that we tried, we know that we have something, but we're also dealing with some things that we just don't know, and that's really represented more of the project, because we know what's going to happen with their closures, but nobody really knows what that's going to mean with regards to downtown. Now we have lots of plans, lots of things in place, you have lots of business development, lots of communications, but it's still a project that's never been done before, which was a Business 40 major thoroughfare that is just going to go away for a 2-year period. Yes, the impact is going to be on the people. Yes, the decisions for actually making some choice is going to be on the people. But again, the strategies themselves are to say there are options. Mobility is your own decision how you get around, but there are options. And here are some things that are worthwhile looking at. If you do it, you do it. If you don't, that's your decision. but that's no different than the transit that we deal with every day. It's the choice of the rider, and again, it's cost. There's cost advantages on those choices and conveniences. Going after the project, putting something in front of federal highways, there's no guarantees, but we're willing to go ahead and move forward to do it. And again, wanted to get the input from the city and our member agencies that are going to be impacted by the overall closure.
And my reaction, looking at the outline of your alternatives, is that they're go back to stop.
I'm sorry.
Another one. Yes, stop.
Thank you. Okay.
I don't see any downside if we can get a grant for it to the ride transit incentives, and that would complement what we're doing with our WISTA system of rationalizing the route design to try to make it more attractive both to existing users and discretionary users. And that could also fit in, I would think, with trying to incent van pooling through employers. So I would, personally, I'd be supportive of this kind of effort. The only thing that, among the alternatives that you talked about, that raises in Winston-Salem experience an immediate red flag is the circulator. We had such a negative experience with our rubber tire trolley circulator. That was not done well, frankly, in terms of the visibility of the stops and the marketing of that, and without an intensive, smart marketing campaign, the demand just wasn't there, and it looked bad. But the other things, the park and ride, again, given the philosophy if it's not working, you stop sinking a lot of money in it. But the idea of giving it a go, to me, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I comment on the trolley item for just 1 second, and that is that I think this is a unique opportunity to introduce people to some alternatives, and that might be a selling point to some sort of circulator that's not about circulating people that we might bring in on shuttles, but if I'm downtown for the day, I know that if I don't drive my car, I can still perhaps do a few things while I'm downtown. Again, and that intensive marketing and using this kind of as a help Winston-Salem by not driving downtown, using transit and using the trolley, and could make a difference. And it only takes a small difference, really, to get you back to where it might not be filled as congested.
Mr. Montgomery, did you have?
No, I said I was going to get me a segue.
All else being equal, that makes absolutely good sense. It would be a tough sell here because of the relatively recent negative experience with, again, the rubber tire circulator, the one without fixed guideways and established stops that you couldn't miss. So you'd be swimming uphill with that particular aspect of the plan. Everything else, I think, my personal reaction is it's worth a try.
The intent and the next steps, of course, and there's a lot of detail that we've not shared here because there's a lot that we've really, for sake of time, and I'll stop on this piece. But our next plans, of course, is to go ahead and present this into the park board at their June meeting. We have a presentation that's scheduled from our division engineer with regards to the construction element. See if there's any other questions. Certainly incorporate any things as far as different ideas that we've already reached out to from local staff for all of these different pieces. send it to Federal Highways, and we'll see what happens. We've had some meetings and conversations with NCDOT directly, with our program management people at NCDOT, using examples of what they've done for the 4540 project, also what they're doing in the Triangle with regards to their grant agreements. We've had some concerns and some questions that have been raised about how did this funding flow, where does it come from, but essentially what they basically have done, instead of addressing things of, okay, you're going to have to front this much, no, these are funds that can be appropriated and then reimbursed based on expense, or you actually show the expense and then reconcile. So there's different ways and strategies, and I would say, I mentioned that only from the standpoint of that NCDOT is embracing this because they also recognize this is something new to them. And they're, again, closing down a roadway, haven't really had to address it, got road construction all over the place, but nothing at this level. So still planning to move forward, going to put forth the effort, still going to have everything that we can to make these things actually have some improvement to our mobility. And at the end of the 2-year period, what we're hoping for is that there's some things that we learn and actually pick up mobility from choice riders that have not been forced into this decision of saying, why can't I take my car? Because the bus makes more sense. And this is a project that's basically forcing that question that all of us make choices with mobility. So we're trying to take advantage of that, but also see that we have some success in the long run. So we'll see, because there'll be plenty of folks that look to say, hey, how many trips are you doing and what are those expenses? But again, we don't know until we try, and we're willing to make that next step.
So if this were approved, if this grant were awarded, the money would go through parks?
It would, what we discussed is it depends on the actual piece. Incident management, if it's directly with NCDOT, the funding would be established directly with Division 9. For things with marketing, it may go through Division 9, depends on what that marketing employee is, could come through parks. Some of the operations and the incentives that could come through parks. So those things certainly have to be worked out. But there are different options for us to work out directly with NCDOT. And again, the conversation we've had with Federal Highways is not necessarily about the money, just showing that it's being used and that there's some benefit. And that comes back into the reporting that how many folks are doing it, what folks and what are the returns on those investments. And that ties in with the bigger piece of the plan that we have.
And this is not competing with other local transit programs for the same pool of funds.
No, this is all Federal Highways, Federal Highway Administration. So there's nothing that correlates with regards to Federal Transit Administration, nothing that correlates with regards to formula funds of your population. It is specifically a mitigation strategy from Federal Highway Administration for a highway impact project.
Mr. Turner, am I overlooking anything here in terms of adverse questions from the
No,
city?
I think you anticipated the question that staff would have had about whether there'd be any impacts on your transit operating budget.
Any other questions comments from committee members? Yes.
Not specific to this, but more in general to some of the Business 40 implications for us.
Let's get back to that in just a minute. I want to wrap this. Mr. Barnes, is there anything that that I've overlooked in my inquiries that should be raised in this context? No. Okay. Is there any adverse thinking from the members of the committee?
Glad you're working on it.
Okay. All right. I think you've got a fairly positive reaction, gentlemen. You have that one caveat on the circulator thing. Right. Maybe we'll push back on, but
we will, Mr. Chairman, if we could, we'll go ahead and forward to Mr. Turner and others the full plan that we have, is so you can look into those details, because we're not past the point of saying, okay, we haven't thought about that. There's been a lot of group meetings, a lot of committee meetings, a lot of discussions. We think that we've thought of some different things, but there's always something. And we still like to have that opportunity to say, have you thought about this?
Okay.
And so we'd like to pass that out before we officially send up to Federal Highways and make the formal request for some mitigation strategy funds.
Absolutely. And WISTA per se has its hands full right now with the implementation of the new design and the tweaks that we're looking at and enhancements we're looking at to try to improve service. So that's yes, Mr.
As you apply for the Federal Highways grant, 9 million, is that right?
9.5, yeah.
9.5. Do you need assistance from the city in the endorsements and other things? What is our role in helping you achieve this money that's going to help us?
Very good.
Resolutions, what? I mean, what do we do?
We had thought that we would need to do that tour and get those resolutions. We were advised by Pat Ivey with Division 9 that FHWA
They don't care.
wants to see the plan, wants to see it presented to them, and they're going to make a decision. Okay. Because they're looking after everyone's best interest. So I think anything that you wanted to do would certainly be welcome. But otherwise, we won't be making that tour to get in more.
Well, as you work through it, know that we support you helping us.
Thank you.
Right.
Mr. Larson, did you have a motion? Did you have a motion you wanted to suggest?
I will wait at this point, and if you will come back to us as you prepare your grant, and in a way that we're able to assist you, direct staff or whatever, if that's a motion, to assist you in this endeavor in any way possible. I know there are other people working on different emergency responses and other parts of this problem that we're going to have in a year or so. But your particular effort may have an echo effect long term, as you said, and I'm anxious to support all of that because I can see a long-term advantage to it as well.
Very appreciated. Yep, very good.
Yes, that's an invitation to come back.
Yep, thank you very much. And we'll follow up with detailed plans and any of those things.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Very good. Thank you.
Now, on I-40 mitigation generally.
Right. In particular, I've shared it, and I think there's some things in work now to address the concern I've raised, but it's a more in-depth one, I think, that I'd like a bit more information on. In particular, it's 5th Street, and I know we've looked at and shared about with staff about its current condition, 5th Street exiting off of Business 40, and the current condition of the road as you move from Business 40 through to MLK. Again, staff has already indicated they're looking at some things to improve the surface condition of some of the area that we have. What I have not seen, and I've kind of looked over documents, is in terms of within many of the studies that have been done in terms of traffic count and increase in traffic count, whether or not that particular section of street had been included in any of the studied material that has been done, in particular for the adverse impact on neighborhoods in the Lowry Street area and others in terms of what's going to happen with the addition of the fact that now at this point in time you have closure of access points at 1st Street and from the neighborhood, and then now with the surely to increase traffic on 5th Street, the ability of individuals to exit that neighborhood safely, as well as those who are exiting Old Greensboro Road into the 5th Street area and being able to do it timely and safely has become of a higher concern as we have neighbors who continue to become more educated on what's getting ready to happen and not seeming to see anything that is addressing that part of the community and the impact.
We'll have to research. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm fairly confident it was, but we'll check and make sure.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anything else on Business 40? Any other items to come before the committee this evening?
Nope.
Move it.
All right. There being no further business, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you.